I'm not making any money. This is for educational purposes only. Fair use. Fair use. Yeah, Barakatah Yahweh. Barakatah Yahweh Shai. I want to give all praises, all honor, and all glory. Kahalal Yom Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachaha Chodash. I'd like to give double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well and do well, to the elder apostles, bishops in Connecticut, the bishops, the preachers, the teachers, the evangelists, and the four winds, preaching in truth and sincerity, risking your lives more now than ever, the hopeful elect, Shalom, to the Israelite foreigners who phenotype may look like another nation, but bloodline goes back to Israel through your father, and have come back to the fold, Shalom, to your sisters, your Chwathim, who listen and learn under your husband, which is your spiritual leader, with meekness and with silence. This your brother Aram Yahawada with the lesson.
New World Order, because this is the part that I think a lot of people on social media was like, oh my God, he's insane. No, he's saying it out loud. They want a new world order. Listen to this.
Are we at the beginning of a new world order where we move away from Europe and toward anything else? Maybe even potentially Russia, if we can get past what's happened here? I mean, there's a real question about that, given some of the speeches you've made to the European Union, some of the speeches that President Trump has made, what's happening culturally in Europe, what's their crackdowns on free speech. They just look less and less like we do. And there's a real question about whether there's a massive shift happening now in terms of world alliances long term.
Well, it's definitely, I think, a new world order. I think the president has saw to it. There's a new world order in trade. There's a new world order in globalization and the way that we invest in our economy versus, foreign supply chains.
Ding, 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 ding. Did everybody hear what JD Vance just said? So they're saying it out in the open. You don't have to speculate anymore. You don't have to say, well, this is what I feel, what I think they're going to do. He's saying it out in the open. There is a new world order. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen.
For a while now is finally coming true. And what we're seeing around the world is what's called the end of globalization.
Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America.
The world has changed much. I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
Okay, so what does that mean? Well, here's a very simple way of looking at it. After World War II, the world came to an agreement about how to structure the New World Order. China became the factory of the world. Japan became the lender by keeping rates at zero, keeping the system liquid. Europe became the buyer and consumer of the world. They traded productivity and military for stability and social welfare. And the United States became the country that enforced the whole thing with the petrodollar as the world's reserve currency, backed by the military-industrial complex. Now, that system is what Simon Dixon coined as the proof of weapons network, which means if countries want to trade, or if they want money to build their economies, they have to agree to the rules. The rules were, use dollars to buy energy and do not mess with U.S. interests. The petrodollar made sure that the world needed dollars to buy its energy. The military enforced it all, and financial institutions, along with the central banks, managed the flow of all this money. So if you play by the rules, you got access to investment markets and protection. And if you broke the rules, you got punished with things like sanctions or just outright war. Now, if you're an American, depending on which side of the K-shaped economy you were on, rich or poor, then you indirectly benefited from that system because U.S. companies made a lot of money. And if you were an investor, you also made a lot of money and you got to retire happy. The downside, though, was that to keep this system going, it doesn't just take a war, it takes a forever war, which is bad for the world. Now, if you're poor as an American, it's especially bad because the system gave out all the jobs, supply chains left, factories left, and what it did was it concentrated wealth, it hollowed out the middle class, and it created a very fragile dependency on other nations for their stuff. Because America stopped making stuff. The only thing America made was money and technology. And for a long time, that's how the world worked. Technically, it still does, at least on paper, but it's coming to the end. Because fast forward to today, and some of these nations decided to team up and said, okay, we'll make our own system then. And they've become so powerful at this point that the proof of weapons network cannot enforce the rules anymore without going to World War III, which no one wants. And at the most recent meeting at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, which just happened, the people who sort of control these levers of power said that this game is over.
Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It is what the WEF has stood for, which is export, offshore, far sure. Find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind. It has left the American workers behind.
So now Japan is being forced to repatriate its capital back, sell their US treasuries, just like all the other nations in this new world. This weakens the dollar because the dollar needs perpetual demand, and that demand is disappearing. Europe learned if you depend on other countries for your energy and you outsource your safety and your military, well, then you've got no power to enforce the rules. So what we're left with is what was talked about at this World Economic Forum. The question was, how do we divide power in this new world order? That's what I want to help explain. I want to show you who the players are, what each of them wants, and what it might look like in the future. So with that said, let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andre Jick. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the New World Order. So the old New World Order. So the old game that's been played since World War II for about 80 years or so is coming to an end. And it kind of perfectly lines up with something called the fourth turning, which is a model that shows that every 20 years, we've got a new cycle which starts with the high, followed by the awakening, then the unraveling, and now the crisis or the reset. That's where the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland comes in. This is where the world's most powerful people get together to talk about what the new game is going to look like.
This is the largest gathering of global leadership of the post-COVID period of time.
So first I'm going to try to explain who the players are and what they want. This gets very complex. There's all kinds of different power structures with different incentives pulling in all different directions, all trying to take a piece of whatever replaces this old system. So let me give you a high-level, condensed overview of what's happening. Now, there are technically 4 groups of power. The first group is what we can call the financial globalists. Some people call it the transnational capital. Why is it called that? It's called that because transnational capital means these people do not pledge allegiance to a flag. They don't represent a nation's interests. They are money, and money can be anywhere. Hence transnational, because it transcends nations. So who are these people? Who am I talking about? Well, at the very top, these are the asset managers. And at the top of that food chain are 3 specific ones. They're the apex predators of this structure. And that is BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which together manage tens of trillions of dollars. Now, they thrive in a world where money or capital can move anywhere, anyplace, anytime. Now, that money is not their money, obviously. It's their clients' money. But with that money, they are given a superpower. That superpower is that all corporations around the world become subordinate to them. How? Well, because corporations optimize for access to capital or money. And through that, asset managers get to vote on behalf of their shareholders. And here's an example of what I mean, because I know it sounds confusing. If you're buying mutual funds or ETFs at a place like BlackRock, your money is being allocated to different types of funds, but you don't get to vote on what the individual companies within those funds get to do. Now, you can vote with some funds, but the reality is this chart right here, is that most people won't even bother at all. And this chart right here is from BlackRock's website, which actually shows that in 2025, out of the 7.4 trillion in total index equity, only 3.65 trillion was even eligible for voting. But of that, only 812 billion actually voted. That's only 11% of total index equity, which means 89% of their clients' votes was exercised by BlackRock, not by their clients. So even though asset managers don't own the money they manage, they are using their clients' money to vote which way a company goes and who those companies hire for their members of the board. Now, downstream from that is everything else, like access to capital, access to markets, and all the other things. That's why Larry Fink is at the top of this food chain. He is the top G here. And what you have to understand about this power structure is that it does not need to pass laws or control the military, because by controlling capital flows, they're able to guide most of the decisions. Because if you're the CEO of a company and the money flows to you, well, then your company grows. But if it leaves and you get kicked out of the index, well, then your company gets smaller and you get fired. So if you want to succeed, then you're going to probably do as you're told. And that is the ultimate superpower. Now, I should also mention, though, that there's not just one apex predator here. There's another one. And that's the banks and the Federal Reserve. So asset managers and banks, I believe, are separate players with their own unique interests. And I think you can tell that from this conversation between Larry Fink and Christine Lagarde, where she drops a hint that central banks might not always be around.
So I'm not going to tell you that there is a red line. I'm not going to tell you that central banks will always be around either. speak to what you did. You just said something very interesting.
No, I'm
You
not
said
going to speak more to it.
no to the idea that central banks might not always be around. What did you mean by that?
Look, I went through my lot of crisis, as many of you have as well. And I remember the days when it was mentioned that, central bankers are the only game in town. This is not the right approach. This is not the right approach to a balanced and durable equilibrium.
Okay, so asset managers are separate from the banks, which are competing together. Now, on the bank side, the apex predator here is Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase. And he says he's a globalist.
Hey, ready? Here's your headline. I'm a globalist.
Now, a globalist means, if it were up to him, he would continue the world order as it is today. He wants NATO to be strong, he wants to protect the interests of the West, and he wouldn't change much.
I want a stronger NATO, a stronger Europe. Some of the things Trump has done are causing that, some are not. I'm not a tariff guy, though I'd use it in the 8 cases I had. I think they should change their approach to immigration. I've said it. What the hell else do you want me to say?
So the central banks are resisting all of this, which kind of makes sense because they're the power structure that benefited the most from it. So asset managers and banks, 2 different players that want 2 different things, but both are part of the same power structure, which Simon Dixon coined as FIC, or the Financial Industrial Complex. The second group of power players are what you might call the sovereigns, right? And these are the leaders of Tier 1 nations. Tier 1 meaning those with access to nuclear weapons. Now, a sovereign is someone that believes globalization is a threat to their power and control. A sovereign is not necessarily trying to win the globalization game. They're just trying not to lose control. And their power comes from things like laws, borders, tariffs, and sometimes they're even willing to sacrifice their market for their sovereignty, their independence. And they're willing to put up with some economic pain not to lose control over industry, energy, and security. Now, who are they specifically, right? Well, that might be someone like Vladimir Putin, right? A guy who doesn't want to privatize his nation's resources. He doesn't care if Russia's stock market isn't doing all that great. He wants it so that only the Russian government can drill for his oil and not ExxonMobil or Chevron. He doesn't really care if Russian stocks underperform US markets. And sovereigns also don't care if the rest of the world doesn't really want to play with them, right? Same can be said of China's Xi Jinping. He prefers state control and long-term growth over access to Western capital. Same can also be said of North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Same but different. Sovereign power resists globalization because they know they cannot win this game. And that's also why the financial industrial complex hates them so much, because they're unpredictable and they are inefficient from a capital point of view. But they're popular and their voters keep choosing them because they promise control and obedience. They have clean streets, right? They have order, which is very efficient. So their people really love them. So in a nutshell, they understand that to allow transnational capital in their countries would mean giving up all the leverage that they have. Now, the third group are the technologists, sometimes called the technocrats. And they don't really care about nationalism versus globalism. They mostly care about things like efficiency, scale, and networks. They believe that technology will someday replace or automate a lot of what governments and institutions are doing right now. But I also think it's important to understand that technologists are not necessarily at the top of the power structure. They don't control the capital flows. They can work with almost any player in the system as long as they are given funding, access to data, and the permission, right? In that sense, they're also transnational because their software goes beyond their borders. And as globalization breaks down, they kind of get more powerful, right? How? Well, because financial power pushes for programmable money, digital IDs, social credit scores, automation, robots, etc. Right? So the capital moves in their direction and they get more powerful. They have a lot of leverage, but they're not quite the most powerful as the financial players are in this structure.
Should these glasses be illegal in the U.S.? Nobody believes.
Quite the most powerful as the financial players are in this structure. Now then there's the fourth group, though, which is the military-industrial complex. And this is sort of like the enforcement layer. Their power comes from force and the intelligence agencies. They thrive mostly on instability. And their role is just to enforce whatever system is in place right now. They're not really subordinate to the government like you might think. They're more subordinate to the financial industrial complex because it's the financial powers that dominate the government, not the other way around. Okay, so now that you hopefully understand who the players are, the next question is, what do they actually want? So let me start with the most powerful group of them all, which is the financial industrial complex. Now, one of those players, the asset managers, what they want is a world where money or capital stays liquid, fast, and controllable, even if nations and countries fragment, right? Because deglobalization is a problem for them because because borders slow money down. Different countries have different rules, different currencies, different settlement systems. And all of that is what's called friction. It adds cost and complexity and all the stuff they don't want to deal with. So their solution then is tokenization and fractionalization, which is something Larry Fink has talked about for years.
I think the movement towards tokenization, decimalization is necessary. I think we need to move very rapidly to doing that. We would be reducing fees. We would do more democratization.
Now, tokenization just means taking assets like stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, whatever, and putting them on a blockchain so they can trade instantly, globally, 24/7. And fractionalization means breaking those assets into smaller pieces so that more people can own them and they can move them faster. So now you can live anywhere in the world, and regardless of which country you come from, anyone can buy stocks from anywhere in the world, right? But what that also does in practice is that it hugely benefits whoever controls the rails. Now, asset managers already control the assets, but tokenization allows them to control the infrastructure as well. And in the future, AI is going to play a huge role in managing this whole system. And because it's on the blockchain rail, they're going to have all the tools in the world to see everything that's happening in real time, and they'll be able to take advantage of that information for better or for worse. But remember, there's also the bankers. And what do the banks want? Well, preferably to kind of keep it all the same, but really their biggest goal right now is to avoid the privatization of money. Here's one of the central bankers at Davos saying exactly this.
As I am a central banker, let me insist a bit on at least I gave a speech 2 weeks ago with a triangle of threats and a triangle of answer, but let me sum up. The first threat is privatization of money.
So in other words, they want to not be what's called disintermediated, meaning they don't want to be cut out of the capital flows. They don't want to be made irrelevant. How do they do that?
Here's the answer, is CBDC.
Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. This is how the old system is trying to stay relevant. Because if cash is disappearing, if private payment rails are taking over, if tokenized assets are routing around them and asset managers are building this new infrastructure without the banks, well, that shrinks the power of the banks. So CBDCs are a way for the central banks to have their own programmable money. And banks have to be very careful here, because if corporate CBDCs are allowed to exist, and if they pay an interest or a yield, that threatens banks' deposits. Banks don't want their deposit money leaving because their customers are buying corporate-issued digital currencies like Tesla coin that's going to pay them a 5% yearly interest on their savings instead of their savings account that's going to pay them 0.2% interest, right? That's an existential threat to the banking power. So just remember that the banks want CBDCs and control over what corporations can and can't do with them. But they also have some competition, and their biggest competitor is the crypto lobby. Now, the crypto lobby is challenging the banks, and what the crypto people want is fair competition. Because in a fair game, crypto wins. Crypto knows that, and the banks know that. And here's the CEO of the biggest crypto company in the US saying exactly what I just said.
I think Americans should be able to earn more money on their money. Banks should have to compete on a level playing field. And if the American people feel like the banks are not paying high enough interest rates and stablecoin rewards can offer them more, then maybe the banks should have to pay higher interest rates to compete, right?
So that was Brian Armstrong. And he wants to make sure that the rules are such that the crypto lobby can compete with the banking lobby. Crypto people want control over the CBDCs so they can pay you a higher interest rate for holding your cash with them, which ultimately threatens what? The bank deposits, which is the bank's source of power. But guess who's got more money, more lawyers, and more influence? That would be the banks, which is why the crypto lobby is upset right now, because the legislation is not fair to them, because obviously it's not designed to be, and that's how the game is played. So anyway, at the very top, we've got the asset managers, then the banks, then the crypto powers, which, depending on how regulation goes in the future, aka who has the bigger wallet for the politicians, this might flip, and the crypto lobby could someday overtake the banks. So that's the financial industrial complex, or the FIC structure. That's power player number one. Power player number two are the sovereigns. Now, what do the sovereigns want? And what they want is almost the opposite, right? They care about a seat at this table and control of their resources. Their ideal world is where they control their energy, their food, their industry, their security, even if that means slower growth and slower markets, right? Some countries just want to be left alone. Other countries want to consolidate power regionally and absorb their geographic proxies, like Russia wants to do with Ukraine, like China with Taiwan, like the US did with Venezuela and Greenland and whatever else, right? And some of these countries have expansionary dreams, right? They want to have a seat at the table, which is why Russia says they're going to join Trump's board of peace. And they'll pay $1 billion if they could use the money that the U.S. froze from Russia, and if they could help broker the deal in Palestine, because they want to be a part of it.
Я думаю, направить в Совет мира $1 миллиард США из замороженных еще при прежней администрации США российских.
And if they could help broker the deal in Palestine, because they want to be a part of it.
Я думаю, направить в Совет мира $1 миллиард США из замороженных еще при прежней администрации США российских активов.
Okay, well, then you have the technologists, and they don't really care who's in charge politically. What they want are the government contracts, the data, and maybe a bailout if that's what keeps them spending. And in return, they'll develop all the things like digital IDs, the robots, the social credit scores, and they'll trade the data and the tech with whichever faction happens to be in power. And then there's the military-industrial complex. They weren't super represented at the World Economic Forum, but their interests are usually instability, which justifies spending, which enriches the defense contractors, which is ultimately a proxy for the financial industrial complex. Now, the good news, though, is this. If all goes well, the world should not be going to World War III. Instead, we should hopefully see less invasion and less occupation because the forever war model is unwinding. So, in a nutshell, asset managers want programmable money, the crypto people want to have competition, the banks want to not be irrelevant, sovereigns want control over their own countries without being destabilized while having a seat at the table. Technologists want access to money, and the military is there to just enforce the rules. Now, a lot of what I said is overly simplified in this video, but it is based on provable information. But really, the most important takeaway from this video is that I'm not describing altruism versus evil or good versus bad. This is just power versus power. And there's a lot that I don't want to say, not because I'm not allowed to, but because I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. But if I could just give you my personal opinion about all of it, I think that all of this has already been negotiated. And what we're watching is just political theater. What we're seeing in Venezuela and Greenland and Russia is just theater to justify it all. It's geopolitical posturing for the countries. They're like, okay, in this new game, how do I want to be perceived? Am I weak? Am I strong? Who am I, right? What is my identity here? That is the theater. And this is the algorithms making us engage in all of it. But the reality is that the range of possible outcomes for all these possible futures has already been pre-negotiated. Maybe not the exact script, but the general big idea, I think, has already been established. But hey, in the meantime, enjoy the celebration and or the humiliation of certain people. I can't prove it, but that's just my theory. Now, I do want to give credit.
So yeah, that's crazy. He said he didn't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but everything he said was a conspiracy theorist, you know? Which are really conspiracy facts. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get into a couple of these scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson be edifying. This is 2 King chapter 17, verse 4, right? It says, the king of Assyria found conspiracy, right? Because they'll tell you a conspiracy theory. But a theory is I believe when you go back to the word theory, is to think, right? So they're telling you that it's a bad thing for you to be a thinking person, right? You know, and conspiracies are real because it's in the Bible more than one time. It's in the Bible several times. But I'm gonna do two different verses, you know, and I think I might even get Psalms 83 too, because that in itself, it doesn't say conspiracy, but you get the gist of it that it's definitely a conspiracy. Right, so it says the king of Assyria, right? Because at this time he was ruling, he was in power. He was a mighty army, which that represents America today. America is also known as Assyria, as well as Egypt, as well as Babylon, right? Those were all two ruling or strong militaries of their time. So that represents America spiritually to this day. Found conspiracy in Hoshea. For he had sent messengers, so king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, right? So he sent a message to the king of Egypt, which is the Pharaoh, and sent the Pharaoh to join him in a military adventure to basically take down the king of Assyria, right? And he had done he had done year by year. Therefore, saying that he used to give gifts. He used to give the gifts year by year. He usually sends these gifts, as he had done year by year. Therefore, the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison, right? Because he didn't give the gifts, which is synonymous to this whole thing with the taxing them. Basically, they're gonna put the globe on lock, And if you are, well, they said, comply or die, and that's their agenda. That's where they're on the Novus Ordo Seclorum, as you can tell. JD Vance and a whole bunch of other the World Economic Forum, the World Health Forum, all these, they're all in cahoots on one level or another, right? Then the king of Assyria, right, came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria, which that's where the northern kingdom, which is Ephraim, right, the 10 tribes, and came against them and besieged them 3 years, right? Came after him until they finally got him and took him captives and took him to Assyria, took him into slavery, took him into bondage, basically like POWs, right? And that's what ultimately what all you people would be, under this Novus Ordo Seclorum. All of you will be just a bunch of PODs, right? No, POWs, Salakia, not PODs, but POWs, Salakia, POWs, and then you will have to get the universal basic income, right? So that's, so at this time they besieged them until they got them. That was the Northern Kingdom. This was a past event, but we reckon this to, also this is what America's going to do. And supposedly Trump has already spent his first year, so it's 3 more years of Trump. So imagine what's going to happen in these next 3 years if all this stuff happened within this first year of now, right? You're only second month in 2026, and hey, it's been said there's years where nothing happened, and there are weeks when years happen. Major events are happening within this time. The Lord is shortening the days for the elect's sake. Yeah, so this is Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5. It says, O Assyrian, the rod of my anger and the staff in their hand is my anger, which is dealing with them. They were ruling. They had a strong military at that time, which that shows you that represents America spiritually in this time, right? Because America's was, this is Job 9:24. The earth is given into the hands of the wicked. America, basically, they're in the power seat, right? Especially the Edomites in America, and they have that great military, and the Lord set up Edom, to be his whooping stick against you, right? Even King David said, "Save me from the wicked, which is thy sword," right? And that's Esau. That's the blessing that he'd been given, his sword. So he's going to come against you, so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian in this time. He did in the ancient times against the Northern Kingdom, right? When they were going off and wouldn't come back to the Lord. So the Lord drove them from the land, from Israel into Assyria, and then some of them had a council, and they decided to say they want to go into Arzareth, which is America, and keep the customs, which they didn't. So the Lord sent a different kind of Assyrian, which is the Edomites, to come up against them, right? And that's for all 12 tribes, right, at this point. And I will send him against a hypocritical nation. That's you so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indians. You are a hypocritical nation, right? You go against each other. You have this so-called black against brown. You don't know what's going on. You don't know your ass from your elbow when Esau Edom is your enemy, right? You're in the ghettos, the hoods, the barrios, and the reservations, and you're doing all sorts of manner of selling drugs and this and that, and then you say black and brown pride, black and brown power. Well, that's not power if you're murdering and killing each other. That's a hypocrite, man. You say you love God and do everything opposite of loving God, or everything that's opposite of righteousness, right? Right? Even dressing your daughters as like harlots. But if a man looking at her You're like, what are you doing? My daughter, she's only 11 or 12 or 13, 14. Well, her titties are popping out. I think her butt's hanging out the bottom of her pants, and someone looking at, you're you know. So you don't really care. You just care to be a hypocrite, right? If you want to do it, be dress modest, be a respectful people, take care of yourselves, and then I'm not saying not protect yourself, but then when you're respected and this and that, it's expected of you to protect yourself, and that's when people don't bring up Chicago every time. Well, what about Chicago? What about how many times you kill each other? What about all the pimping, the drug dealing? Oh, what about all the? Now they have to bring that up. But if you wasn't doing that, if you cared about yourselves, people would say, hey, they have a natural care for themselves, so it's naturally that they will lash out against anyone who come against them, which it's going to be natural anyway. It's going to come full circle anyway, but the Lord's going to send them. This is because the Lord said he's who shall arouse Judah up, who shall arouse that lion up, and that's what's about to happen. The Lord's going to send them against the people of my wrath. Will I give him charge? So the Lord's going to command them to do it, which they want to do it anyway, to take spoil, right? Because was it Second Ezra 16 says that he should cast you out of your houses and take spoil, right? Which means your goods, your food, your water, right? And force you to you either comply or be unalive, right? To give to take a prey, right? And that's they're going to be hunting you down through their AIs, their robots, and drones, things of that nature. Their surveillance, right? Pretty soon they're going to be micro C-hipping everybody. Digital ID, micro C-hip is pretty much around the corner to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Hey, and that happened in those times, but it's about to happen all over again. There's nothing new under the sun, right? And this time it's because the times you're living in, it's digital, so it's going to be a lot more dangerous. It's going to be a lot more horrific, right? It says, howbeit he meaneth not so. So howbeit that he's going to do this, and we didn't mean that. We didn't really want to do that. It's just because of and they come up with these excuses of why they did this and that and why this is happening, as they slowly creeping into your neighborhoods and all these different things. Something's about to happen, but neither doeth his heart think so. So we're not thinking of doing these things. We're just all these excuses, and then people you're lax and you're thinking but this dude is your enemy, but it is in his but it is in his heart, right? Which is his mind. It is in his mind to destroy and cut off the nations, not a few, and that's been the agenda of the elites, right? They want to cut off 7.5 billion people, right? Yeah. So this is Psalms 83:3. Start at 3. It says they have taken crafty counsel, right? Counsel is 2 or more people coming together, right? Which that's where you get the word conspire. Con meaning with, spire meaning breath or to breathe upon, right? Coming up with whatever ideas that they have to, in which they do that when they go to these different was it Davos, Switzerland, or whatever they do. They have these G7, G6 meetings, these BRICS meetings. It's all really to come together or to conspire, which that's what they do. Was saying they're conspiring on how to bring in the new world, right? Not saying it's necessarily bad or evil, just saying this is just the trajectory of how finances and merchandise and things are going to be moved around, changing the entire banking system, right? Moving from the 4th industrial world, which was digital, to the 5th, which is interconnected with the computer, right? With it being able to speak, with it being able to control everything, right? Making everything what do they keep trying to make it sound good? It's going to be how they say it, you know, the way they be trying to do this thing, saying it's transparent, right? You know what I mean? But being they can use this system to see everything per thing, what you gain, what you lose, if you borrow, if you did this, that. So say you need money and say you borrow some money, they may tax you on the money you borrowed, you know? And you may be like, no, I'm not borrowing from an institution. I'm not borrowing from a company, which, you know, of course, a company, you borrow money from a company, of course, they put on their interest or whatever, until you could pay them back. No, they're just saying a regular exchange between you and a person, that's going to get taxed. You see the neighbor and, you know, maybe she's an older woman and she can't get around that well. So you go over there, you know, back when I was a kid, we used to do that to make extra money. You go around, you go to the doors of all the older people and you ask them to take out their trash or do their yard or whatever, and you make a little extra money. So you can't do that without being taxed. That's basically what they said. That's the transparency that they're talking about. You won't be able to even exchange, hey man, let me borrow $2. You won't be able to exchange the small amount of $2 without being taxed through them. You know, the pettiest things, you know, because they're going to have the overall complete total control, right? So that's their thing. And that's what they're conspiring. That's what this council, right? They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, who? The Israelites, the so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indians, namely here in America, even though we're around the world. But that main place, because even that lady said, what's Israel's greatest threat? And she said something about Black Americans, the black youth in America. Well, we're not in Israel. We're not Hezbollah or any of them other people shooting missiles upon you. So what do we have to do with you? But it's us, because we are those people. Whether you other so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian people recognize it or not, we must be those people, because their greatest threat is young men with Bibles, young women who's being modest and dressing modest, who's not being hypocrites, right? That's their greatest threat. Yeah, it says and consulted together, and consulted against thy hidden ones, right? And to hide us behind these names, Black, Hispanic, Mexican, then even try to come up with different terms. Oh, well, okay, you saying you're the Israelites? No, you're the Black Hebrew Israelites, right? Oh, you're trying to say you're this? You're the Black identity crisis, or you're these all these negative stigmas that they're trying to place upon you, which that's not us. It says they have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation. See? And not only are they trying to cut off us from being a nation, they're going to cut off the nations, plural. So this has been, it's in their mind to do these things, right? So they're talking about only leaving 500 million people left so they can control that Novus Ordo Seclorum, right? That the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance, right? Which is unto your mind, you so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian, right? Because the name Israel's in the news all the time, but they don't want you to come back to your heritage, back to the old way, back to the paleo, to the pure language, which is what Paleo Hebrew, which they call the Canaanite language, which will give you the understanding of what Yahsha'Allah, he, prince, Yah meaning he, Shar meaning prince, Allah meaning power, Yah, Shar, Allah, power, prince, and a prince is what? Son of a king. So we're the son of the power, we're son of God, right? They don't want you to remember that, right? It says may be no more in remembrance, right? For they have what? Consulted, right? Con meaning with, salt, right? That basically is talking, consulted, when you, what does it say? You consult with the agent, or your constant how do you say it? Consultation, right? A consultation with you consult with an agent or whatever, right? And that's what they're doing. They're consulting, and yeah, they're agents agent provocateurs against you, so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian. That's why they do it in the so-called the George Floyd thing. They send in no paid people, and then they say they know there's paid people, but then yet they're using all these different things. Yeah, I mean, come on, man. So yeah, it's the other guy brought up the thing. Why not bring that person up on who's it, George Soros? They say they know he pays money. Why not bring him up on treason charges or whoever, on both sides? Because they say there's people that pay the left, there's people that pay the right. Won't they go find out who's paying them and on both sides put them in jail for treason? And then now you don't have the paid people out there. Now you have grassroots general people out there protesting, and then it's not gonna spin out into something else when it don't need to, when it's not necessary, which is gonna do anyway because the time you're about to approach. But but they have consulted together with one consent. Ooh, right? That's what they want. That is a conspiracy. One consent. They are Confederate, right? Is that not a conspiracy? But they want to tell you conspiracy theory. But I believe when you think of the word theory, I believe the word theory just means to think. So they don't want you to be a thinking person about conspiracies, right? Against thee, right? The Tabernacle of Edom, which is a self-proclaimed so-called white man. It says, and the Ishmaelites, right? We know the Ishmaelites, so-called, the Middle Eastern people. I want to say Arabs because Arabs are mixed. Arabs really mean mixed. It means a mixture of different. But we know the Middle Eastern countries are Ishmael, which you can go ask them. They know that their forefather goes back to Ishmael, right? Moab and the Hagarenes, which are Ishmaelites too, right? It says Gabal, Ammon, which is Japanese. It says and Amalek, which are the small tiny tops over there in the Middle East, blowing the so-called Palestinians to smithereens over there, committing genocide. And then you got the Philistines, which that's supposed to be the people of Palestine, but they're not. The real Philistines are straight up tall, so-called Africans. It says with the inhabitants of Tyre, which are so-called Africans as well, right? So we got all these nations that basically come up against us, right? And they're all in cahoots with this. Yeah, Ashur, right? Just like the Syrians, because those people still exist, but the spiritual Syrians right now is America. Also is joined with them, and they have Holopin, the children of Lot, right? Which is the so-called the Chinese and the Japanese, right? Which Moab is the Chinese, and it said Ammon is the Japanese, and then I guess it just reiterate into the children of Lot, which probably goes into those other tribes like North Korea, South Korea, all them other little islands that's because they're descendants of all of them, so they'd be, still like the children of Lot. It says do unto them as on the Midianites, right? Destroy them. As to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kishon, right? Because the Lord destroyed these people who came up against the Israelites, and that's what's going to happen all over again. These people that have conspired, right? Conspiracy, which is a real thing. Yeah, I just typed in here for theory. Theory. It says theory. Now you gotta understand. Conspiracy is in the Bible, so conspiracy is a real thing. If you and another person hate someone, and y'all decided to do some type of harm to that person, whether it's the simplest thing is to try to do something to embarrass them, or you did set up something where you robbed them, or you took their life, or you did whatever you were doing, that is a conspiracy. Whether you understand it or not, that's a conspiracy, right? But to make fun of someone, to have a theory, right? And it says a theory, a supposition of a system of ideas intended, right? So you're looking at things, and so you're coming up with things, and it's saying like a system of ideas. Well, the only thing you could come up with to come up with the system of ideas, or what you call evidence. So if I grab this evidence, and there's this evidence, and there's this evidence, it's not like I'm pulling some out of my, you know what I mean? you know, out of thin air. But even then, if you did that, there's still explanation to why you were able to do that. You know, like the brother who created that machine that could take the moisture from the air and make clean water for people to drink. There's a reason why that machine is able to take the moisture from the air and then make it into water. There's an explanation for that. It's not like you just, there's nothing to it. Especially when you're thinking of something. So you said a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially on the base of general principles independent of the thing to be explained. So you have a so-called a reality of life that they give you. So when I'm explaining to you that this thing is the Matrix, or this thing is not as real as you think it is, or some things that you see, which everybody's starting to see that now. Like I said, with the whole thing with the so-called George Soros and some other people that pay these people to riot and protest. Well, you've seen people riot. You see them throw the fire. You see them do whatever. You see them do the thing. That person actually did it. But there was a secret motive behind it, which that in itself is a conspiracy. Right? But for me to have a thinking mind, and you want to make me feel bad about being able to think, right?
Hypothesis.
Right. And a hypothesis is what? When you're thinking of something, right?
Thesis.
Yeah. Hypothesis, thesis, right? Which is pretty much the same thing. You're thinking of it. A state of a theory that is put forth as a premise to maintain or provide is central thesis that the physical life is not part of the material world. Right. So you're thinking, you're being a thinking person. Right. So you know what I mean? They want to criminalize you or make you look crazy for being a thinking person. Yeah, that's a good one, huh? Conjecture, yeah, because you're putting out all these different ideas, thoughts, think. Well, there you go, thinking. There you go. So now they want to make you be a bad guy or seem crazy because you're a thinking person. Oh, you're one of those conspiracy. Really, he's saying you're one of those thinking people, right? And you know what Trump said about that? Smart people don't like him. He like his uneducated people, remember? And that goes for them and all the elite. They like the highly uneducated people. Because if you're a thinker, that's bad. It's not good. They don't like thinkers. You're crazy if you're a thinker. That's why everybody got this what's it called? A hive mentality. This mega. And even on the left side of this agenda with the Democrats, it's a hive mentality. Yeah, they're lost. Yeah, so this is Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 10, verse 4. For whose cause the earth being drowned with the flood, right? Which the Most High did it. The anger of the Lord judged the world, which that's what's going to happen to the entire world. First 2/3 of the Lord's people is going to send Esau after you 2/3, or you Israelites, you so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian, and you Israelite foreigners who phenotype may look like another nation. Things are going to happen to you, right? It says, wisdom again preserved it, right, through saving of Noah, right, and directed the course of the righteous in a piece of wood of small value, right? I mean, because if you think about it, no one thought about that being anything particular, anything great. He just went out, cut a couple trees, cut it down, shaved it, right, and built the boat. Yeah, that's small value. It's nothing, right? Nothing spectacular, right? So they probably was looking by him every day. Man, what are you building this boat? You're in the middle of nowhere. Most likely the ocean wasn't even nearby. Man, no, why are you building this, man? This is crazy. Man, the water's gonna come down. God's gonna judge this place. He laughed, shrugged his shoulders, said he did it for about 120 years until that day when it came. Says, moreover, the nations in their wicked conspiracy, it's all through the Bible, being confounded, right? And that's what's going to happen. You're going to get confounded. When you thought when the rain wasn't coming, when you thought the race riots and the wars and the pestilence and all the different things that the scripture spoke of, and it's not even our words. The Lord said we can't speak of our own words. We have to give you thus saith the Lord. This is what the Lord said is going to happen, but you laughed at what we said, just like they did in the time of Noah. Hey, being confounded, she found out the righteous and preserved him, right? And that's the time where, Lord willing, we're fastly approaching on, and Lord willing, we're part of that number. I hope the brothers that I can't wait are part of that number. All of us. I mean, I hope all you brothers that's out there on the highways and the byways, right? Enduring to the end, Lord willing, you're saved, and your children and your family, Lord willing, Wait, yeah, preserving what? Blameless, bro. Hey, we need that, man. We need to be preserved blameless. Because this place, with the false accuser, all he does is blame us, man. Right? So that we need the Holy Spirit, we need Yahweh Shai, to make us blameless unto the power, unto the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, and keep him strong against his tender, compassion towards his son. See, we need that compassion towards Yahweh Shai. There's another scripture that talks about kiss the son unless he be angry. So we got to be pleasing to Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, When the ungodly perished, she did deliver the righteous man, right, which was Noah at that time, right, who fled from the fire, right, and that's going to be us this time, Lord willing. We will be able to flee from the fire, which fall down upon that was Lot. That was Lot at this time, and hopefully we're like Lot. Yeah, because Lot was able to escape. Yeah, and when the ungodly perished, she delivered the righteous man who fled from the fire which fell down upon the 5 cities. Yeah, which was Sodom and Gomorrah, right? The 5 cities, right? And that's how you know that's going to be America, because America is also known as 5 cities, right? Yeah. So this is Isaiah chapter 19, verse 18. In that day shall 5 cities, right? Speaking of being, this is America in the land of of Egypt. That's America, because America's spiritually known as Egypt. Speaking the language of Canaan, right? I mentioned that, right? Which is the Lashawan Kodash, the Paleo Hebrew, right? Being Yashar Allah, right? That's us, Lord willing. And swear to Yahweh, right? Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakakodash. And that's Paleo Hebrew. What I just said. When I say Yahweh, which means he is, or the existing one. Bahasham, which in the name. Yahweh Shai means he saves or he delivers. Right? That's Paleo Hebrew. That's the Canaanite language I just spoke to you. Now, am I adverse in knowing all these different ways to be able to speak? No, I don't know that deep, but we know that the name is very important. To swear to the name of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai of hosts. One shall the one shall be called the city of what? Of destruction. That's America. Because the son of perdition or the son of destruction is ruling over this place. Right? Esau, Edom. Right? In that day, right, which is fastly approaching, shall there be an altar. And that's what this place is. Ultimately, every time we go out on the highways and the byways, it's an altar. Right? Right? To Yahweh. Saying we set this up as an altar to Yahweh, right? To destroy 2/3 of the Lord's people. Right? Because they have to be a sacrifice. Right? Also what? The other nations, right? Starting with Esau. Has to be a sacrifice here in Egypt, in this land, in this spiritual Egypt, which is America, which is spiritually also known as Assyria, which is spiritually known as what? Sodom, which is going to get that same judgment as when Lot came out of Sodom. Great fire is going to fall upon this place, right? Starting with the ICBM missiles, but also, hey, the Lord's trying to get involved with the laser beam from the chariots. The Lord's going to have fun. Bringing fire upon this place. It says, in the midst of the land of Egypt, right? That's this place right here, and a pillar at a border thereof to Yahweh, right? Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, man, and that's what the Lord is going to make. The men, starting with the apostles, pillars, right? He said that you should be pillars, unto this faith, into this thing, of ours. So, Lord willing, this was edifying. I'd like to give all praises, all honor, and all glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Ruach HaKodash. I'd like to give double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well and do well. To the elder apostles, bishops in Connecticut, the bishops, the preachers, the teachers, the evangelists, and the four winds, preaching in truth and sincerity, risking your lives more now than ever, the hopeful elect. The elect, Shalom. To the Israelite foreigners, whose phenotype may look like another nation, but bloodline goes back to Israel through your father, and have come back to the fold. Shalom. To your sisters, your akhwatim, who listen and learn under your husband, which is your spiritual leader, with meekness and with silence, and above all, Kwam Yasharallah.